Уважаемые друзья, мы с вами в сессии «Персональные данные». Сегодня с вами...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, participants of the conference. We are going to discuss a wide range of issues pertaining to a very important topic on the protection of personal data. But before we start, I would like to inform participants in the audience that all the speakers, all the announced speakers are present, and some of them are sitting on the stage and others are sitting in the audience, and there will be some changes in the order of appearance, and we will start with Asia and then go to Europe, and through Hungary we'll go to Russia. So first we will listen to international speakers, and then we will listen to Russian participants, and we will learn from each other what is done in the field of the protection of personal data. But before I give the floor to our international participants, I will tell you what I'm concerned about. I work in Skolkovo, and we have many companies. We have startup companies working with big data and personal data processing and data processing in general. And now I understand that there are lots of tricks that have appeared lately. These are sniffers. Raise your hands, those of you who knows what a sniffer is. So now I talk to professionals. What sniffers do, when you join a Wi-Fi, this sniffer sniffs virtually all information about you, and all the web pages that you visit, your preferences, your age. Every time you use a public Wi-Fi, you don't read, just like me, we don't read these agreements. We just say, okay, I agree. We click, I agree, and that's it. And that's what most people do, because all of us want to get connected. And those sniffers, they collect personal information, and they sell this data. And when it comes to PR, so when we started discussing a similar story here in Russia, so the first claim, the first request from hotel owners from St. Petersburg, and they said, well, we have lots of visitors from abroad. We don't know what to do with this personal data, how to process it, and how to protect the privacy of our customers. So today we have a very good opportunity to learn from each other, and we start with international speakers, and then, as I said, we go back to Russia. And I would like to give the floor to Bin Rahman, and I will give the floor to you, and I'm asking our engineers to upload the presentation.
Thank you to Mr. Moderator.
Большое спасибо, господин модератор.
For inviting me, representing my organization and my country as well. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. It's my first time coming to Russia and Kaliningrad. Thank you very much. So I will start first. Without further ado, I will start first. So my topic today is related to data security as a key enabler for the economic prosperity. So as you can see, the landscape of the internet, of the technologies now has moved very fast. We are using the fintech, whereby the payment through the mobile apps, payment through e-commerce websites. And we are now moving towards Industry 4.0, whereby machines will talk to machines to execute its own tasks, and as well cloud computing and big data. So as of today, what we are seeing is there are more than half of the population is connected through internet. Yeah, the world population is 7.5 billion, whereby it shows here is 4.3 is well connected. So can you imagine that the people, you, me, and the rest of the world is communicating every second. We share the data across the global very fast. And then for this year, the business has a concern whereby they have worry, whereby 48% of the business share that they are quite fear in terms of cyber incidents. Reason being because lots of economic losses, lots of damage in terms of brand reputations, financial, and also legals and regulations. And you can see on the right side, it's the top 5 of the likelihood going to happen is data fraud and theft, and as well cyber attack. So cybercrime is replacing traditional crimes nowadays. If you can see, for the past few years, among the largest losses occurred or happened within the banks. A malware called Carbanek has impacted the entire world, whereby the losses is, I guess it's around 1 billion, almost 1 billion losses throughout the bank and also the consumer website and so on. And as you can see, on the red color column, the cybercrime damages will cost the entire world 6 trillion annually by 2021, in next 2 years. So that's why we are seeing that the cyber attacks, data breach, it's impacting the entire world. And then you can see here, it's this being analyzed by the breachlevelindex.com, whereby as of now, there are 14 billion of data that is being shared within internet or dark web and so on and so forth. And Malaysia, it's no exceptions, including Singapore as well. Yeah, last 2 years, we are seeing the largest data breach in Malaysia, whereby 46.2 million of Malaysians' mobile phone numbers leak. And then this is the largest one. We have another 6 incidents occurred within 1 year and a half. So the entire losses, roughly 60 million of data. So you can imagine, it's 2 times of Malaysia population. So, this data actually is very valuable because there's a demand, right? It's being shared all over internet. It's being shared in the darknet. If you happen to know the darknet, it's quite difficult for you to access because you require specific tools, specific process and methods to actually get into the dark web. And it's not like a Google that's being re-indexed. You need to have specific URL address for you to actually get into the data. So all of these kind of losses, damages, and cybercrime. So what's our approach? Yeah, Cybersecurity in Malaysia approach in data protections. So the definition of information technology security is comprises within the element of the data protections, including physical and data storage, within the IT, within the information technology environment. And then this data is actually being secured or being stored within 3 platforms. The first one is data in use. The first one is data in use, data in motion, and data at rest. Yeah? If you can imagine the phone, when you do the e-commerce transactions, financial banking, the phone is, when you insert the data, is data in use, right? And then when you transfer the data from this phone to another server, bank server, it's called data in motions. And then once the data being stored into the server of the bank, they call it data at rest. So this important, so you need to ensure that the data that being stored in these 3 elements secure enough. Yeah, I'll share later on what kind of process that may require. So the next one is a data loss due to the lack of people, process, technology. The process is, of course, a lack of guidance, lack of policy by the organizations. The technology, the technology itself is vulnerable to any attacks. It's less secure because lack of skill sets by the developer or by the engineer. And the last one is the people. Well, from the cybersecurity practitioner perspective, the most weakest link is the people. Yeah, the people is the most weakest link because we tend to neglect or we tend to ignore the securities such as password. Yeah, nowadays you simply use a simple password and you share it among yourself. Perhaps that's why we need a stronger password with special characters, A, B, C, numbering, and also 1, 2, 3. You need a longer and stronger password. So what's our approach on this one? Okay, the The first one, we have a methodology whereby we focus on the holistic approach. There's no single approach can secure the data. You need to have 4 elements. The first one is the policy. The government, the organization needs to have a good policy. The second is the people, including the awareness, including the skill sets. The third one is the process. In order for you to process the data, the transfer of the data, and the technology, of course. The technology that you actually use to secure or to do the transactions. Okay, Malaysia adopted national cybersecurity policy since 2007. We developed using 8 trusts, focusing 10 critical sectors, including transport, energy, military, hospitals. You can see on the red column, emergency services, and IT as well. And a part of that, from the policy, we're able to derive or we're able to create another elements of policy. The first one is a national cryptographic policy. As you can imagine, most of the data breach, most of the data breach incidents occurred and available to be read by other people within the plain text. It's easily, I would say, readable, like ABC, names, and so on. It should be encrypted so that whenever that someone is breached, someone is capturing your data, they're not able to read it because it's being encrypted. Yeah. And then, of course, we're talking about Personal Data Protection Act. And Malaysia adopted PDPA, we call it, in 2010. But of course, this was like 9 years ago. And last year, the EU came up with the GDPR. So this personal data protection is about to follow or align with the GDPR. And of course, we need to, we use the ISO standards, global standards called Information System Security Management. It comprises of both platform, physical platform, also digital platform. For instance, if you have a data center, you need to secure the access first from the door. That would be part of it. Second, it would be the access. People who have access to the system should have a proper access role. Admin, super admin, or just a normal user need to have segregation of role of duties. And of course, the GDPR, I guess this is the most impacting the entire global, I would say. Malaysia is one of it. We actually align our PDPA with the GDPR because if you look at the GDPR itself, GDPR is even though it's mentioned just for EU, but due to the IT, to the cross-border thing, there's no, I mean, the business try to become global, try to become international. They need to actually follow exactly the EU because somehow you or the business will process the EU citizens' data. Yeah. So protecting the data via technology, and of course, if you look at it today, the hackers, hackers is no longer will hack your wall. It's not the way that the hackers trying to do. If you can imagine, you have a house, you have a window, you have a door, and you have a wall. The hackers nowadays, they're trying to see why should I knock the wall if I can use the door? Yeah. So that's why they're trying to build a software or malware or virus that can be planted through the door. Simply access, for instance, your email. Your email address, I guess you'll be able to see some things like installations of file that been sent over to you without you recognize it. Once you click it, it will bring you to another, I mean, it will compromise your network. Yeah? And for cybersecurity, for the technology, we have 4 elements: predict, prevent, respond, and detect. So the first few slides I mentioned about the prevent, like the policy and the governance. And the second one is to detect. So in cybersecurity, we developed our own tool called CyberDef, Cyber Detection, Eradication, and Forensic. So whenever there's malware, we will work to eradicate it. Once we're able to eradicate, we do the analyze, we do the forensics, where it's coming from, what will be the what would be the objective, and so on and so forth. So from this cyber dev, we produce a product called CMUP, Coordinated Malware Eradication Remediation Research Project, whereby we planted this software within certain network, and we'll find a malware, we eradicate, do forensics, and of course to remove the malware from the network. And of course, when you say about the data, you store the data into your phone, and whenever you change to another phone, you simply leave it, maybe sell it to another, without you properly deleting your data. Yeah, simply delete data doesn't mean that it's safe or the data totally gone. It has to be properly sanitized, yeah, through a process to the technology. So we have that service as well. We offer the service to our government sector because, of course, the government data contain most of the major data throughout the nation. And then, of course, putting the data via process. So if you can see, for any products, we rely on the best practice. It's a global recognition standards called Common Criteria, and Malaysia is one of the accreditor for the Common Criteria. So what is it about? So it's a process whereby we ensure that the product being developed by specific organizations is secure enough to build the confidence of the user. Yeah? So you can sell your product throughout the world using these best practice standards. And of course, in order for us to actually secure our nations, after the attack, we practice an exercise called National Cyber Exercise Drill, whereby it's like a fire drill, but this one within the cyber environment or within the critical sectors. And of course, because the internet is beyond our perimeter, it's borderless by nature, so we need to collaborate further in order to provide better governance, better process, and better policy. And last but not least, is of course the by people. As I mentioned earlier during my presentations, the awareness of the people is very lacking. Yeah? It's very lacking. So cybersecurity, we come out with a framework called Cybersecurity Capacity Building Framework. It comprises of 3 elements. The first one is called cybersafe. Safe, the definition of safe is cybersecurity awareness for everyone. Yeah, it's like you and me and non-technical people who can have the information on how to browse the internet without in a secure manner. And of course, the cyber guru is the normal practitioner like HR and finance to actually proper use the system. And of course, the last one is Global ACE. Global ACE is to provide a proper skill to any engineers, to any IT professional to execute their IT tasks as a cybersecurity. And we work together with our local university. We even provide our lecturers coming from our industry, our people, our staff to become a lecturer, to provide knowledge to the industry, across any universities. And of course, I mentioned just now, it's a cyber safe. And we partnership within the industry, within the R&D. For instance, I mentioned earlier the cybersecurity, cyber dev is a collaboration with the university because they have a proper academic knowledge for us to actually embed. And of course, again, bilateral and multilateral. Last few days, my CEO, my chief, we just signed with Eugene Kaspersky as the MOU. So there will be a future collaboration with Kaspersky, between Kaspersky and Cybersecurity Malaysia. And last but not least, if you work with the government or we work as a organization, you need to have a classification of the information like top secret, secret, public, and so on and so forth. And as I mentioned earlier as well, you need to have a proper protections at the data in use, data in motion, and data in rest. Because of course, if you're not able to protect, it give impact, financial, brand reputations, operational, and regulations. And last year alone, Malaysia with Microsoft and one of the partner, they publish a report of findings whereby large corporation in Malaysia is possibly have a loss around USD 22 million a year due to the cyber attack alone. Yeah, and then the data theft, fraud, data breach. They have your username, your password, even your address, your mobile phones, your family name, and so on and so forth. So this data is very in demand, whereby my findings through all the internet, through the dark web, shows that it's very lucrative, because the price of 10,000 records can cost around 1,000 USD. Can you imagine 60 million of records of Malaysians being breached? You can multiple with it 1,000 USD. So that's why it's impacting the economy. And of course, last but not least, is the human negligence. Your password, the way you store your data in your Facebook, in your Instagram. Yeah, you actually provide a data to someone who actually monitoring you. Yeah? So you need to understand. I'm not saying that you need to stop using Instagram, Facebook, but it's the way forward. You need to understand the risk behind sharing through this media platform. All right. With that, I would like to say thank you. I'll end my speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juan. Well, yeah, a little bit frightening. Well, I will now switch into English. Well, I think I'm thinking of moving to countryside house and switching off all my mobile devices. Everything. I'm just kidding. But can I ask you a question? Indeed, the human factor, the people factor, I think, is one of the most weakest, if I may say, part of the chain. What is your practical advice first to our regulator, say the Russian regulator, because sometimes we do have some databases which appear on the market, which you can buy, how to stop this illegal leakage, and not only for the regulator, but for the companies who process personal data or just some know-how, trade secrets. What would be your recommendation how to implement the relevant program to stop this leakage, or at least somehow try to control it?
Yeah, if you look at the information, most organizations rely on two platforms, the physical world and the cyber world. You need to secure both sides. You do not leave anything, your printer side, at the fax machines, even on your table. My experience with, I worked with Shell last time. They have a very proper method whereby they call it desk cleaning procedure. You do not leave anything on top of your table after you have finished your work. Yeah, that's the most simple thing that you can secure in the physical world. And in the cyber world, the most simplest thing you can do is to properly secure your laptop, because most of your data organizations rely within your laptop. You use a very simple way, which is lock down your machine whenever you leave your laptop. Whether you go to toilet, you meet someone else, you go to other office, simply lock your machines. And of course, use a proper password, a stronger password. That's simple, because one thing I would like to share, the Japan government has actually come out with a policy whereby they can hack Japanese IoT devices. You know, they allow the government to actually hack the IoT devices, because IoT devices like watches, IP cameras, end user normally tend to use the normal password given by the manufacturer, like admin 1234, right? Admin 1234. So the government of Japan has a list of a common password, whereby they can use the common password. They call it dictionary of password, and then they can use this list of to hack into end users if they don't change to another password. So, password is one thing that you need to secure as well.
Спасибо большое. IoT — это интернет вещей, если кто-то не знает, когда ваш холодильник разговаривает с вашим телефоном.
So IT, this is the Internet of Things, and this is also a very important point. And once I worked in an international company, and head of the Department of Cyber Protection checked all the walls and all the tables in all the offices, and left a mark or a note, and marked each table, each desk by a red or a white sticker, depending on how littered with documents the desk was. And now I will give the floor to
Well, Pedro, your turn. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you so much. I'm again here. I will try to speak slowly so that the translators don't kill me at the end. And I'm very glad. I believe this conference has a really creative program in regards to what I'm seeing in Europe, continental Europe, or Western Europe. But I see the faces of the speakers always very serious. I'm going to blockchain is security. This guy is security.
Not here.
So we need to not to have such a heavy face, closed face. But this is exactly the same PowerPoint or the same slide that I started last year. Okay, everybody speaks about GDPR because of these fines. 20 million euros or 4% of the revenue of the group is the only thing about, because people think about and talk about GDPR. I love to be sniffed, but I earn a lot of money by people who don't wish to be sniffed and by companies who, when they are sniffing according to the law. And they are really threatening about GDPR because of the last articles. GDPR has 99 articles, so it's a long text. It's not the most important text in Europe from the last 20 years of the privacy. It's the most important text of all legislation, European legislation, since the VAT changes on the 80s, since the tax VAT that has been introduced and swapped everything on taxes. This is the major legislation having impact on corporates, on companies and associations. Okay, it was so important that there was some time lapsing when I took this shot. Okay. But in the end, 25th of May happened, and we didn't fall down, and the world continued to survive and continued to live. And Katerina told me, well, this year try to manage something between the GDPR and art. And so I thought, okay, let's speak a little bit about what kind of requirements does a TV producer, film producer, has to comply with when he's shooting, because I didn't want to speak about work, as I believe that somebody will. So there are two kinds of requirements. Requirements towards data owners, so the data subjects, us, physical people. Data subjects are for physical people, not for companies. And there are some requirements, internal requirements. Okay, let's start for the first one towards the data subjects. We are having here some attendees, some participants on a big show, a Portuguese big show. This show is very important in Portugal. They lead the newspaper at 8 p.m. since 20 years. And this program was particularly important because it had around 65% of the share, and he gave the prize. And the day after, by a mistake, I was the lawyer of this TV channel, they've repeated the same program. And the day after, it had 64% of share and even more viewers. So everybody's seen, and even more. So it's an academical study in many universities. And then you have the attendees. Okay, so towards these kind of people, there are beautiful rights that have to be assigned. Image rights, and also, or a contract, if you think that some of the people attendees have a contract. So all TV producers know that they need to show a document to these people who are on the TV shows, and it's to be signed. Now, there are different questions, and more difficult question is when we are shooting on the streets or when we are shooting with a crew on the streets, okay? And now in Europe, continental Europe, meaning Portugal up to, I would say, at least Germany, there are some rules on the civil code about image rights. And now GDPR, RGPDs in Portuguese, GDPR appears perhaps to have additional requirements, okay? Now what civil code in general say in Western Europe is that there is always the need of consent of the image right holder, but if images are taken on within and framed within public environment, they are able to be used. So in the past, many countries, perhaps with the exception of France are always tighter on their view of this kind of legislation. There was no need to obtain any kind of formal documentation, okay? So it was easy, okay? Now, what our GDPR comes to say is that, in general, we need to obtain the consent. But there is an exclusion line stating that when there is the interest of the processor or the controller, meaning the company, to shoot, and there are no major issues on the data subject rights that can be compressed, then we can do the shooting without obtaining the consent. Nevertheless, there are some new practices from several TV producers having people on the streets just informing that there's a shoot to be made. Because if you see, there are two obligations within the GDPR. Sometimes we need to get the consent. Other cases, we don't need to get the consent, for instance, to have a contract, like the one I've said before of this kind, of this situation. Here we have the contract, so there's no need for the consent. But even though we don't need to have and to obtain the consent, we always have to inform. So information is an additional requirement to the data subjects. So even though we don't need to get from these people who's around on the street the consent to be shot, to be taken images, it may need, or we may face the need to inform these people. So the sandwich people that used to be in the US, those people who were on the streets just being advertised with two woody tables on their body, they are now being used in Europe to inform of a shooting. Okay, so these are the requirements that for the data subjects that a TV producer must comply. Now the most important part is this one. This slide tries to teach everybody everything about GDPR in 1 minute. So now, if a TV producer has more than 250 employees, or processes a lot of data, he needs to do an internal registration. So TV producers, big companies, need to file their databases, and also the databases regarding not only their employees, but also these databases about their actors, directors, technicians who work with them besides their more normal employees. Okay. There are also a PIA. A PIA is an assessment of impact proceeding. In some cases they may need, it depends on the size of the databases and the power of the databases. But also some big companies need a DPO, a data protection officer. I would say that in general TV producers won't need such a thing, but if a TV producer is specialized within of a Big Brother's shows, shows where a lot of information can be taken from the participants of a show, and it is not broadcasted, but nevertheless they keep them on their records. I would say that such a company would need also a DPO. And finally, that's the most important thing, is that even if you're thinking that you are a Russian producer and you're acting with subcontractors in Europe for taking pictures or taking shooting or making whatever, and you say, oh, I'm excluded about this, I would say that according to the GDPR, these entities that subcontract third parties are now responsible to verify that these subcontractors comply with the GDPR. So even if you're not doing the shootings by your own on Europe, European Union, at least you have to verify if they are complying. If not, we may face also some fines. Okay, and note that this is a problem. Russia is not yet equivalent country towards processing of data according to the European Union, and so you will always have to use, when you subcontract or when you receive data from European data subjects, to have the standard clauses that have been adopted by the European Union since 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and now they are being redrafted according to the new GDPR. These standard clauses are to be met. So, in the overall, obligations towards data subjects or consent of getting the information or showing the information to them on shooting, and also obtaining consents on shows, internal proceedings, filing internal filings, take care about your processes, verify your processes, and use standard clauses. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Спасибо. Pedro, in Russia you can take shots in public places unless you shot a particular person, so in this regard.
Well, it's exactly the same as in Europe, but this new GDPR is trying to say, okay, at least if you are doing so, please try to inform, because there is an additional requirement.
Yeah, additional work for those who, what do you call it in Russia? Человек бутерброд, sandwich man. Yeah, with his woody plates. Okay, thank you so much. We will now hand it over to Ekas Bona from Hungary. Ekas, please.
Thank you. Thank you, dear ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the kind invitation again from the organizers. This is the second time for me to be in Russia, in Kaliningrad, and to be participating in this conference, as for Pedro as well. I heard and learned a lot of important things about intellectual property during today and yesterday as well. And just before I start, just one quick question towards Pedro. Do you have a rough figure on the fines ruled and collected in Portugal over the last year?
Yeah.
Just because in Hungary, everything is, of course, was roughly said that it's now Armageddon is coming. But the regulators seem to not be prepared enough by manpower. So now the rulings are just starting to come up in Hungary. The first 10 or 15 with the value of 100,000 euro, 200,000 euro. So not even up to the highest level.
Okay, so in 1 minute, you know what happened in Portugal? Until this new law, the fines were from 500 euros up to 30,000 euros. Mm-hmm. Now we have 20 million. And the biggest fine that we had since the last 10 years were around 12,000 euros. In November, our Data Protection Authority fined a hospital of 300,000 euros.
Wow.
So a big earning fee. They earn a lot of these fees. So they are trying to push. Okay,
So
and I believe it's the
up.
second biggest fine in Europe was about of our DPA, which is not uncommon because the French one is the top worst DPA authorities in the world. The second we are struggling with the Spanish, but Spanish still are ahead of us. But we are close. Thanks.
Thank you. So it's slowly building up. We'll see. So thank you again. Sorry for just this question. Just a quick thing about me. I'm taking a role in the European Commission as the digital leader or digital ambassador of Hungary. And this role mainly entitles me to collect and foster local best practices in digital world in Hungary, mainly market practices, so not governmental projects. And I need to foster them and try to foster them and promote them to European level, share these knowledge or knowledges projects with other member states, and gather new funds, direct funds from EU or market money for the rebuilding or the next phase of each of these projects. The main theme of this conference is intellectual property and identity. How do we protect our identity? Are we protecting enough the identity? And our colleague from Malaysia emphasized the most relevant problem, not just in Russia, in Europe, in the world around, is human negligence. And that's a huge problem that all the companies and all the governments need to vastly fight against. And this is the digital skills, how to empower people with enough digital skills to cope up with the troubles of today and troubles of tomorrow. As a recent statistics from the European Union, 35% of the people lack even the basic digital skills, which doesn't mean clicking buttons on Facebook. It means proper digital skills and digital competencies. They lack it all. And the whole programs are missing in Europe. There are some strategies, of course. The strategies are always long-term strategies. We need to focus some short-term things. And the three models I try to tell you quickly about a Hungarian project are built on identification. And the one way of identification, remote identification. The first thing is DocuDrive. That's how the company, the project is called. The project is already in use in Hungary, and it has the sole right to use in the European Commission. Hopefully, it will be expanding the borders, because with the internet there are no borders. Only legislation will depend on how other countries will implement such a thing. And what we are facing is that DocuDrive produces and stores electronic documents, and the documents will be always have a timestamp, a qualified electronic seal, so it will be a data which will never change. It will be a data. It will be a data which is valued by the governments and accepted. There is a technology, a front-end technology ahead of the technology based on the EU regulation and the PKI technology, which is provided by, of course, companies like Microsec and Netlock. Those are not new things, but how the things are put together. This is a new idea and new company. We are trying to help the company to expand in Hungary and in the EU. And even before I got to learn of the company DocuDrive, I heard from one of my colleagues in Peru, a Hungarian lady that we work remotely, that I asked her how to sign the documents, that it should be valid documents, that should be printed out and signed and sent back. And said, no, use DocuDrive. It's valid in EU. I said, what is DocuDrive? Then 2 days later, I learned about the project. And it's really working and getting up pace in Hungary with legislators and with big companies. And yeah, the point is finally to forget about the paper documentation and have the archives in clouds finally, and the data should be the data which when we take, let's take as an example, we take a photo and that's timestamped and have the technology behind, so that data will be taken away 5 years later. That's the same data with the same timestamp, and it's accepted by courts, accepted by legislators, accepted by companies, of course, even if it's a, let's say, GDPR compliant contract or anything else which is protecting our identity. The next thing is called Digipol. That's in progress. It's not already introduced, not even in Hungary, but it's also based on, of course, everything based on the technology which is by DocuDrive. And what we were thinking, and the company was thinking, to try to utilize the paperless identification and try to work like as a digital police. So each citizen, each company owners, everybody could work as a police officer, let's say, in the digital world. And just one example, if there is a traffic accident, two cars collide, and many times happen that the car in the rear, until the first car driver gets out of the car, just makes a turn, and until the police arrives, they say that nobody can prove that actually the accident happened. And if I just take a photo and I identify the timestamp, and it's already sent to the insurance company, it's proven, it's there. That's the proof. And the usage is, of course, quite bright. Digital police, border control, anything that we can even imagine, or even beyond. And of course, the most important thing is, based on the technology, is mobility. So each of us with a mobile phone could work as digital police officers, or in the digital world, with our devices and stamp documents, images, voices, or video, sound, anything. And of course, these documents and images in the European Union now are legally binding and are fully admissible to court, and they will stay even in 5 years, 10 years' time. And the third territory of usage, of course, there are many more to come probably in the future. That's Medicare and e-health. That's also a division or part of our world where we need to get out from the paper world and get to the paperless world, and get in a way that we are fully identified. Our identity will be never questioned, never lost, never changed on the way of long procedures. And of course, the digital functions of patient-doctor healthcare relations are assured of e-signature of contracts, GDPR-compliant e-delivery, paper conversion to legal binding electronic versions, so it's electronic versions of former paper documents, and of course the documentation of medical condition or even treatment of a certain patient or a certain department, long-term archiving of these documents on the patient side and of the doctor's sides, and back again, legal binding electronic documents to support insurance claims for now or for the future. And the basic ecosystem, of course, the digital transformation is not a new thing. It's in Europe now. It's based on the EU legal cloud. It's based on the technologies and the regulation, of course, electronic signature, timestamp. So it's nothing new. What they introduce is just the way how they put it together. That's quite revolutionary and new on the market. So thank you for the attention. There are some more information on the project under the links, or if that's not enough, just ask me or even write me an email for the future so I can help you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Akas. Digital police sounds cool. Like, pew, 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 pew. Stop downloading. Illegal content, stop downloading.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, спасибо вам большое. Ну что, возвращаемся.
Thank you very much again. So we are. I would like to give the floor to Maria, a speaker from Russia, and Maria promised to tell us about the application of the Russian law on the protection of personal data in Russia. This law was adopted in 2006. So what I want you to share your experience of the application, practical application of this law. What works, which provisions work, and which provisions do not work. Good evening, colleagues, friends. It was very interesting for me to learn the experience from other countries, and I will share my experience of the Russian law on the protection on personal data, and I will tell you about people who don't have shredders in their offices, who leave documents on their desks, and if you speak to Russian small and medium-sized enterprises in Russia producing goods for Russia, then the majority of these people, they are not satisfied with the existing protection of private data. and they are not even interested in protecting their personal data because they have problems with money, they have problems with cheap and long-term loans, they have problems with taxation, and that's why the problem of the protection of personal data comes, I wouldn't say last, but this question doesn't come first. And then, of course, there is a there is a dichotomy of employers and employees. Employees are not interested in the protection of their data. They're not concerned about this. And personal data and their protection, this is not a competitive advantage for Russian companies. It's not considered to be a competitive advantage by employers and employees. And when I was preparing this presentation, I went to the Headhunter website of Russia, and I checked 100 vacancies for 100 positions in different sectors of the national economy, and there was not a single mention of the protection of personal data. Not a single employer or business owner mentioned it. And here you can see the criteria which are positioned as competitive advantages. Please have a look at the slides. So the major criteria is meeting the requirements of the Constitution of the Russian Federation, and to be paid an official salary and not to be paid under the table is considered to be a competitive advantage by some Russian companies. And top managers, they mentioned it as their competitive advantage. We pay official salaries. And what you see on the slide is very much the same from the point of view of employers and from the point of view of employees. And I checked companies working in the pharmaceutical industries, and the picture is the same. And I analyzed many companies working in the pharmaceutical industry, and among other competitive advantages, they mentioned bonuses or a company car or some remuneration, and quite a few people were interested in having a share in a business, a share in a company. So these are all competitive advantages from the point of view of Russian employers, and people were not even very much interested in having, say, 5 or 10% of shares of their companies. And the protection of personal data, there was not a single mention anywhere. And I would like to explain why nobody speaks about the protection of data. So I heard a very impressive sum of 12,000 euro as a fine for the breach of IP legislation. Our fines are slightly over 100 euros. So this is the maximum fine, and the law envisages just a warning for the breach of personal data legislation. So the punishment ranges from a simple warning to 100 euros fine. And I spoke to people who work in courts, and I said, well, yes, we have a criminal code. And there is a law on the protection of personal data, and the harshest punishment is 4 years sentence. Has it ever been applied? No, was the answer from my colleagues, and they said that only if the breach of personal data legislation led to some financial consequences, then this article is applied, but not in any other case. Now, the protection of personal data. Who protects personal data and how personal data are processed in Russia? And here is the profile of a typical officer who works with personal data. And you all understand who these people are. So this is a person who looks like an evil person from a series from the 1990s. I would like to explain it to our colleagues. This is a tall man who weighs 100 kilograms, 2 meters tall. Oh, please stop describing the scary person. So he comes to a company, and his major function is to make people scared. And if I come to a company, I am 1 meter 60 centimeters, and I see such a person, and I will tell him everything, all the secrets that I have, because he looks so scary. And this person is not part of the staff, and if an employee of this company goes and complains about the action of this scary man, so he gets no reaction because officially this scary person is not a staff member. And in 99.9% of cases, he has a military background or law enforcement background. Either he's a retired officer or a pensioner. And then very often companies hire people from private agencies. And I asked about the salary. So how much does it cost to hire such a person from a private agency? And for instance, if my company orders a system for the protection of personal data, it costs much more. It costs much cheaper compared to the salary of this scary man, hired from a private agency. And of course, I understand that the Salisbury incident influenced the picture a lot because companies are a little bit concerned about the background of this former officer or former law enforcement officers, and they try not to hire them. But nevertheless, these are the people who protect personal data. And one of the principles which is violated more often, a very limited objective is usually set when the data are processed. So we have access to big data, but we have access and process only one particular position. For instance, in our company, or I know companies, when people ask not about education or professional background, they ask, how many children do you have? How do you have loans? Have you been in jail, or things like that? And do we actually, these people don't have the right to ask about criminal history, because if a person served a sentence in jail, say some 20 years ago, so it doesn't matter, it doesn't really matter when the person is hired, because it has nothing to do with your professional competencies. Why don't these people ask about the level of education and professional competences that the person has?
So they violate these principles, but unfortunately you cannot report these violations because, well, we do not have any mechanisms to report the violations. Everybody who, actually were accepted to work. So who has ever been asked to sign the documents before you were accepted to work? Well, you're lucky. So then I will talk to you after that, after our session, because, well, I have never had it in my practice. I have never heard that, the employers ask that for that. So, but when do we make the choice for protection? So, just it happens, but unfortunately, everything in Russia becomes efficient only at the last possible moment, and so just the not the very last moment happens when we understand what we are doing. So I think that the most important thing is to be an educator, so that the employers and employees know what they can do in the process of accepting or just employing a new person. So, and I think that we have to raise the education level. We have to shape the practice, and we have to stimulate the Russian companies so that they could process the personal information and to create the database on personal information. The best motivation for the Russian company to do that is to enter the international market, because as soon as the company comes to the international market, it is mentioned that the international companies won't work with it unless it complies with all the international regulations on the personal data protection. I sometimes saw the situations when even the micro businesses which worked abroad, which went abroad, had to develop the strategy, the policy on personal data protection as soon as they decided to go global. So then. So the incentive for the company to start protecting the personal data is to be is to be punished legally. Just is to go for the court or to be sued in the court. Then the company thinks that it might cost a lot, and the company wants to minimize the risks, and then it will just think about some strategy on personal data protection. So they see sometimes the bad examples with the partner companies or with the neighboring companies, which is visited by some representatives of the authorities, of the legal authorities, and then they come to the idea that, okay, we are going to create the policy for personal data protection, and we have to work out some local laws and regulations on personal data protection and exercise them. So we have got, sometimes I saw the cases when a company creates such documents, but they are never exercised, they are never implemented. So just in case the authorities will come with some regular checkup, and then they will produce the documents that they have developed. So, but that's not the best case, because the company, if it wants to go global or if it wants to develop, has to comply with all the necessary rules and has to understand all the ways how to reach the high standards of their quality and high standards of their work. And you cannot do that, you cannot develop in economically if you don't comply with all the rules. So I ask or I call for the companies to grow and to raise their benefits, to raise their profits. But I warn you that you can never do that without complying with the legislation and without protecting all the personal data of the employees. So please, colleagues, if in the interview, a strict officer, a tough officer asks you about your criminal record without signing the agreement on personal data protection, don't answer the questions. Come to Maria and claim and file your complaint to Maria, and so she will tell you what to do. So we know that now the just the violations of data protection can be punished with 75,000 rubles, which is $1,000. So that's the fine on such violations. And we go on talking about Russian legislation. And I would ask Irina Yakovleva to comment on what's going on with our private personal data protection. Just give us your perspective, please. Yeah, so everything works fine, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to this session. I see all the beautiful people here, and, I decided why not to participate. Yeah, so I would like to I would share the opinion, Maria's opinion, that it's really very important to share the experience in different jurisdictions, like, Oriental, European, any other country with Russian legislation, because everybody works with regulations in personal data protection. And but everybody relies on their own economic tasks and objectives. But we have the same goal, and we have the same aim. But I would like to be brief because we have got another presentation after me. But I would like to think about some striking examples from Russian legislation in comparison with GDPR. Unless GDPR does not go subnational, then the Russian laws on personal data protection do not specify their action within the legal space or within the personal space. If GDPR,
Должны иметь операторы персональных данных.
if GDPR ascribes the procedures how to collect the personal data, Russian legislation is not so strict. It's softer on the policy and the strategy of data collection. So we don't state any criteria on how to collect personal data, and that results in two opposite attitudes. The first one is to be very strict. The second one is to be very loose. So data, then another thing is that children leave lots of traces, information traces, when they go online, and sometimes they don't understand the impact of the information, because sometimes the information can be really very negative. It can affect their future, and nobody knows what kind of future, expects them. Sometimes they, in some cases, they might be willing to become politicians, but they don't know yet when they are children. So then we probably have to think about stop leaking the information and make children clean after themselves when they go online. But there are no regulations and there are no rules how to do that. Then just when we think about the copyright, we actually don't always register the copyright on some songs or on some creative products. Like, for example, Ivan Ivanich Ivanov is the creator of a song. So he goes to the Copyright Society, and then he goes, he gets his song registered, and he gets the money, remuneration all the time when his song is performed there. But then the Copyright Society becomes the enemy to some companies like ours, to IP chains, when we have to track who is the real author of the song. Or sometimes the authors just do not file or just do not go to get their song registered. And then there is a question, where is the, copyright and whose data we work with, and how we can protect the data? Well, because the network is not the operator of personal data. And until some certain moment, we don't classify the personal data into some category if the personal data are not registered. That's briefly what I want to say, and that's briefly what our point of view is. I won't take your time any longer, but I think that it's really very good when we can get together with the representatives of other countries so that we can discuss internationally what the legal incentives are and what can be introduced, what new norms can be introduced into legislation, so that each country can provide better protection, better legal protection of personal data, so that we can study the experience of more advanced countries which have seen different cases and issues, different digital cases, and different, just cheating and hacking on personal data when it happens in the digital space. Because sometimes we actually don't don't know how much the personal data left online can can affect our future life. Yeah, so we very often see personalized advertisement, which also is a sign that our personal data are leaking, and it certainly can affect our conscience. It certainly can affect our life, and that can become a real tough problem.
Thank you very much, Irina. And now we give the floor to our next speaker, and to Natalia Kiselova, Coordination Center of the National Internet Domain. Good evening. Good evening. So I represent the Coordination Center of the National Internet Domain. So we register domain names .ru and RF. So recently we celebrated our 25th anniversary. Congratulations. So I would like to continue the previous speakers. Digital hygiene. We have a very good law, even though the law on the protection of personal data is different from the European directive, European regulation, but still I can say that the law is put in effect, and we all know that a large number of domain names are registered every day, daily, and administrators, in order to get the name, have to submit personal data. And the volume of data to be submitted depends on what domain name the person wants to get. So you know what domains are, and there are separate, different domains, higher domains, national domains. And national domains name have these abbreviations that you can see on the slide: RU and RF. In Germany, DE. These are examples of national domains, and then there are general use domains, .com, .org, and there are many other domain names. And depending on what domain the person wants to get and the type of domain, they are coordinated differently. National domains are coordinated by national legislation of the country. And before the 25th of May 2018, all data submitted when registering a domain was sent to a free and rather open database. And general access domains, the national regulator issued criteria. I will show you on the slide. This is these are national domains. There were some criteria. For instance, all data on physical people were in open access, and you can see the name of person, you can see an email, you can see the web address, mobile phone number. So all personal data who wanted to get this domain. And of course, there was a trademark, and this service was open, and actually, it was very easy to trace all the breaches of legislation. And in April 2017, there is another domain name, and the situation has changed virtually over 1 year because this new domain name registering personal data of children is no longer in open access, and this the new domain name is protected, and all the personal data of children that are part of this database, they are protected. And of course there are many different scenarios how to find compromise solutions to protect personal data of people. And we actually considered a scenario when we could get a consent from people who would want to open their personal data. This is one scenario. Then another scenario was to protect this data or to make the data open only to law enforcement agencies, to police, and there was even an idea to provide the access to personal data to intellectual rights owners. But the European documents, European regulation actually was different from our approaches, and our responsible and relative authorities sent a letter to European authorities in order to find a compromise bridging two different legislations, Russian legislation on the protection of personal data and European legislation asking to but what the proposals made by the Russian party was not accepted, and the European Union managed to provided access to personal data of European citizens only to law enforcement agencies of Russia. And in May 2018, there was a temporary policy was adopted as a transitional measure, and law enforcement agencies of Russia complain that it's rather difficult to get access to the personal data of people in search before the 2019. So what can they do? And it makes search for criminals more difficult. So we have to find a reasonable balance between open access and closed access. In the Russian Federation, we, as I said, we have a law on the protection of personal data for Russians, which is in effect in Russia, and the situation has not changed since 2006, and we are protected by the law, and our domain names are protected by this law. And here you can see the subjects in the slide. You can see the subjects and the intellectual property rights holders when they want some information. And this transitionary measure that I spoke about, this document has been in effect only during 1 year, and now I know that there are public hearings because since June last year we have been working on a permanent policy on the protection of new policy on the protection of personal data, and we are working with different.
We are widening the list of different subjects of this work, and we are going to accept the final version of this policy in February 2020. So that's actually what I wanted to share with you. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, distinguished colleagues. Thank you for such active work. And that is the last session, and we are a little bit beyond our time frame. So we haven't discussed everything. We haven't discussed all the questions. Please send your comments to the organizers so that next year we can work better and we can have more discussion.